Man-made drugs and why they bother you. Cocaine and amphetamines inhibit the reuptake mechanism, prolonging synaptic activity. We're going to talk more about both cocaine and amphetamines in just a minute. Selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, Prozac, Paxil, Zoloft, prolong the synaptic activity of serotonin. And of course the problem is, or the good thing is that it tends to decrease depression, but at the same time it decreases the sex drive, because serotonin, the more serotonin you have in your hypothalamus, the more inhibited testosterone is, and testosterone is people's sex drive. So that's the way that works. Alcohol increases the number of receptors for the inhibitory transmitter GABA, so it has an inhibitory effect. Antipsychotic drugs block dopamine receptor sites. We talk about schizophrenia. You have too many dopamine receptor sites, so the antipsychotic drugs actually block that. Curare, on the other hand, blocks nicotinic acetylcholine receptor sites. The nicotinic acetylcholine receptor sites are primarily in the movement part of your body. That's what the nicotinic acetylcholine, that's what the receptor sites do. They allow you to move. The curare blocks those nicotinic acetylcholine receptor sites, and the individual, or whatever you're using the curare on, they become paralyzed, and their respiratory system stops and they die. As I said, we find curare in the Amazonian River Valley. The natives of that area use it to shoot monkeys, and the monkeys will run around for a while, and then all of a sudden they'll slow down, and then they'll become paralyzed, and they'll fall out of the tree, and then they eat them. When they kill them, they eat them. And that's what they use curare for. Physostigmine is a drug given to Alzheimer's patients to increase memory. It works because it inhibits the acetylcholinesterase. Acetylcholinesterase breaks down acetylcholine in the synaptic cleft. Because it inhibits acetylcholinesterase, it allows more acetylcholine to be in the synaptic cleft. And because there is more acetylcholine in the synaptic cleft, the individual is able to remember more. They seem more normal when they take this drug. Now the problem, well, it's not really a problem. So that makes them seem more normal. Their memory loss isn't as great, and so it seems more normal. The problem is that it's just a short-term solution. The reason it doesn't last longer is because the acetylcholine producing neurons in the brain are still being destroyed. And so eventually it doesn't slow down Alzheimer's disease. It just makes the person seem more normal. So we used to call this stuff Cognex, but that was, I don't know, 30 years ago or so. All this stuff changes. So it does improve your memory, but it isn't a fix, and there's no fix to Alzheimer's disease. It's a degenerative disease that eventually will kill the individual.
So as time goes by, and it gets worse, their memory, and then it just doesn't work anymore?
It just doesn't work anymore. But the interesting thing is that the memories that they do maintain tend to be old memories. So they're the ones that are buried the deepest in your brain. The ones you rarely think about.
Right.
So the individual literally goes back to their childhood. They can't recognize their own children. They probably can't recognize their own spouse. But they can recognize, or they remember things that happened to them when they were 5 years old and 7 years old. These things that are deeply buried in their brain, all of a sudden, they can remember these things. So, I don't know.
There was I believe there was a movie.
Notebook?
No, there was one that's called, I forgot the name of it. I think it was Robin Williams and Robert De Niro.
Oh,
that
right,
one?
yeah, and he gave him L-Dopa.
Awaken?
Awaken.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
that was
Yeah.
the same, where was it, in codified state, where they gave him like a dose of opioid?
It was L-Dopa. It's a synthetic dopamine,
Yeah.
and it made them normal for a period of time. They went back to where they were before. L-Dopa is fairly toxic, so you really can't just blast them with this stuff. You'll kill them. I'm not exactly sure. You know, this is one of those toss-ups.
Yeah.
You know, your medication's killing this person, so do you keep them in a vegetative state for a prolonged period of time,
Yeah.
or do you give them the drug and kill them sooner, or they will die sooner? You know, it's just one of those toss-ups. Wow. Opiates are analgesics. Analgesic means painkiller. The opiate receptors are found in the limbic and the hypothalamic areas of the brain, as well as the gray matter of the brain stem. This is the most primitive portion of your brain. That's where all of these painkillers are, or all of these opiate receptor sites. The reason we call them opiate receptor sites instead of endorphin receptor sites is because that's how we discovered them. We discovered them because opium worked. And because of that, they called them opiate receptor sites. They didn't know that there were any natural painkillers in the body, but they knew that opium worked. The opiates worked. Synthetic opiates such as Demerol can be injected directly into the spinal cord to cause pain blockage. And if you've ever had a spinal, that's what it was. They just injected the Demerol into your spinal column, and it blocked the pain from that point. My wife just had hip surgery. She just had both of her hips replaced. And during the surgery, they had her sitting up, and she was actually, could have been, if she wanted to be, she could have been completely awake. But she didn't want to watch them cutting and chopping her hip out, her hip joint out. But they just used a local, not a local, what am I thinking of? But they just blocked her spinal column. They do the same thing with delivery. In the old days, they did it automatically. The woman came in and she was in labor. They would give her a spinal block, and then she would give birth to the child. It wasn't very painful. It was far less painful. And then they realized that potentially or not potentially, but when they were injecting the Demerol into the woman, that the baby was getting a dosage of the Demerol as well, and that reduced their response. And they of course wanted the baby to respond. That's when the baby comes out, the baby has to start breathing. The baby has to start responding, and they realized they were getting a lot more babies that they weren't exactly sure if they were okay. So they stopped doing that. They didn't stop doing that. They just reduced the amount of people coming in. My mother had 6 babies, and they knocked her out. They knocked her out completely as soon as she went into labor, which was a little strange. But she complained about it, not the fact that she had been knocked out, but the fact that the babies. It took the babies about a day to recover from it. So it was a little odd. Of course, she was a nurse, so she had the background to complain. And eventually they did away with it, as odd as it may seem. Anyway, so it's called a spinal. Endorphins are endogenous opiates. That is what is normally, naturally in your body. You have endorphins, dynorphins, and enkephalins. Endorphins are released with physical activity or select physical manipulation, such as massage, bathing, and breastfeeding. The massage, bathing, and breastfeeding, that works with women especially, but it doesn't work very well for men. The male muscle mass tends to be a little bit more extensive, and because of that, the endorphins don't really work as well from this type of manipulation, the bathing. You put an individual into a warm bath, and they relax, and they get all these endorphins flushing through their system. Or massage. If my wife goes and gets a massage, my goodness gracious, she's almost like a rag doll for the rest of the night. She's never breastfed, of course, but All of these release endorphins, but like I said, it doesn't especially work on men. I had her cousin, my wife's cousin, was a massage therapist, and she claimed that, and I've never really had a massage. I mean, every time somebody's tried to massage me, it didn't really work because my muscles aren't very tight. My muscles are naturally not flexed. So when she started manipulating my trapezius muscle, she said, "Man, you're really loose." And the reality is I'm pretty relaxed most of the time. So the massage was more for somebody that had tight muscles with, blockages in various places. Doesn't work as much for males, but it does work very well for females. Endorphins tend not only to block pain, but to energize as well, and that's a real positive thing. So some individuals, they get a lot of endorphins flushing through their system when they exercise. Runner's high, for example, is a good example of endorphins. As I have told you before, I am not sensitive to opiates. I've asked doctors about this, and they mostly don't want to talk about it because they have no clue what the hell's going on. It's not like they're going to do an experiment on me to discover why opiates don't work on me. Now, about 5% of the population, of the world's population, are not sensitive to opiates. They think that it has to do with fewer endorphin receptor sites. That's one of the theories. Pain doesn't, I don't have any more pain than anybody else does. And that may be because I have more dynorphin and enkephalin receptor sites. I don't know. Like I said, we haven't done any experiments to figure it out. Anyway, opiates don't work to the irritation of most physicians that I come in contact with. Marijuana is the most widely used legal illegal drug in the United States. Alcohol is legal always. What else is legal? Nicotine, tobacco is legal. But marijuana, of course, is legal in 7 states and illegal in all the rest. People are trying to get marijuana legalized. And usually the arguments they use have to do with the fact that there are medical applications to marijuana. But of course, none of us have any medical problems, so there's no reason why we should ever use marijuana. It does cause problems. Marijuana does cause problems, and of course, there's only one nation in the world that has actually legalized marijuana, and that is Canada. So maybe we'll be getting good research coming out of Canada. Or maybe we'll be getting good research coming out of Washington State, Colorado, Oregon, California has now legalized marijuana. But they're going very, very slowly as to the legalization. Where was I? I was down at Snowflake a couple weeks ago, and of course I was riding with Marius, and he was saying, "Look! That whole building over there is a marijuana farm." Yeah, they have grow lights at night that they turn on, and it has this purple glow to it. So they've got this. Yeah, I know. Evidently the Mormon church in the area owns the marijuana.
Oh my gosh.
Which is funny because they can't use stimulants at all. I mean, they're not supposed to. They
Because
can't.
they're spiritual, right?
It's just a business, and they're making big bucks, evidently. It seems.
So Coca-Cola, I heard that they also almost want Coke.
Right, but it's got caffeine in it. They can't use it. How stupid is that? They can't drink coffee.
When I was in Oregon this past summer, not past summer, but this past summer, and even like I've seen like on the side here, like people that are homeless, they live in their tents, just the side of the road, like the freeway, and they'll have like remember those big 10, they're like tub containers, and you'll see people, they'll be growing their marijuana in those tubs beside the tents. And then I'm sure they just sit there and get high all the time.
I guess it's one kind of job to have. The main active ingredient of marijuana is delta-9 and delta-8 tetrahydrocannabinol. There's two of them. The human brain actually maintains receptor sites that turn out to be cannabinoid receptors, and we didn't know for the longest time. It's just like opiates. We knew that the opiates worked. We knew that opiates had a receptor site. Well, we had no idea what receptor sites these were, what endogenous structure they were. Eventually, we figured out that opiates, there were endorphins in our brain, and those were the receptor sites for the endorphins, and the opiates were occupying those endorphin receptor sites. So with the cannabinoid receptors, it took us until the 1990s to figure out what was going on. And what we discovered was that anandamide is a substance in the brain that tells you when you're hungry. It also triggers your short-term memory. So it was anandamide's receptor sites that the THC was actually attaching itself to. So because of this, now we understand why people have short-term memory loss when they smoke marijuana. We also understand why they get the munchies. Anandamide, when somebody is satiated, then the anandamide receptor sites will be no, that's not right. I got it backwards. When they are open, that tells people that they're not hungry anymore. The anandamide. When they are occupied, it means that you're hungry. So the anandamide receptor sites tell you when you're satiated and tell you when you're hungry. By smoking marijuana and occupying these anandamide receptor sites, first of all, they mess up your short-term memory, but the other thing is that they tell you that you're hungry. So now, of course, you've got the munchies. Now you get the munchies. Sadly, I guess, you're hungry for just about anything. But especially salty foods, I guess, and sweet foods that you would normally eat to fill yourself up. So you've got this strange hunger. It's not like you're going to go out and eat carrots or something, or celery. You're going to try to fill up on potato chips. A lot of people that smoke pot eat cereal right out of the box, especially sugared cereal right out of the box, as odd as that seems. But then again, it's sugar and it has a lot of mass to it. THC receptors are found in the hippocampus, the cerebellum, the substantia nigra, and the cerebral cortex. Now, this is kind of a problem. This can potentially be a problem because substantia nigra is where the dopamine comes from. So if you overstimulate this area, potentially you're going to reduce the amount of dopamine that you're producing. If you don't have enough dopamine, then you get Parkinson's disease. Wait a minute. This isn't good. So people that smoke a lot of pot potentially are making themselves more susceptible to Parkinson's disease sometime in the future. And actually right now we're seeing a lot more Parkinson's disease than we've ever seen before. It's really hard to determine what's causing all of these things. One of them could be cocaine. Cocaine overstimulates your brain, as we're going to find out in just a minute. But also pot smoking could do exactly the same thing. Oh, what a great idea. Anyway, so we have THC receptors in your cerebral cortex. This has to do with your short-term memory, which isn't good. It's also in the hippocampus. That has to do with your long-term memory. So people who smoke pot can't remember stuff very well. They have a hard time remembering things. Both their short-term memory and their long-term memory is affected. The receptors reduce sensitivity to pain, and this is one of the medicinal aspects of marijuana. It reduces sensitivity to temperature. That's also one of the positive things about marijuana. It also reduces your nausea level. It relieves nausea. This is all great stuff, but it also reduces movement. In other words, it makes you not want to move around very much. So you're almost catatonic. It reduces your response to external stimuli. So a lot of things become internal as far as your stimulation is concerned. It has something to do with boredom. When you are smoking pot, you're not bored. And usually that's because you're attending to what's going on in your own body. So if you've ever been around somebody smoking pot, they might have gotten fascinated by the blood vessels on the backs of their hands. They were looking at the pores on the palms of their hands or something. Just something silly. I mean, well, not really silly. But remember, they have a hard time remembering anything. Their short-term memory is affected. Their long-term memory is affected. They don't want to do anything. It reduces their movement. These individuals a lot of times will not be working. They can't. It's hard to work with all these problems. I just talked to my son yesterday, and of course he left Colorado because he was having a hard time. He was the only one not smoking pot, and he was the only one working. He was working in a bar, and the bar owner is just a pot smoker. So he wanted to blaze up with all of his employees, but of course you can't run a business this way. So he had my son, and my son was doing everything. He was cooking, he was bartending, he was waiting tables. I mean, he was doing everything. And they had people that they had hired to do the bartending, to cook in the back, and to take orders. But they weren't doing anything. They were just kind of getting their paycheck and not doing jack. And it really upset him to the extent that they eventually left Colorado, even though they loved the state. It's a beautiful, gorgeous state. It's mountainous, so there's a lot of things that people do. They ride bikes, all of this physical activity. But wow, they legalized marijuana, and the place just went to pot. In essence, it went to pot, which is kind of fun.
So they're just not all doing anything.
I'm sorry?
So they're just not all doing anything.
Right. Yeah, you don't feel like doing anything. It's just so silly. Anyway, so let's legalize it for the whole United States. We're already having problems in our school systems, so let's legalize marijuana. If we have it legalized for 21-year-olds, what's going to keep a 17-year-old from using it? It may be illegal for them to do it, but it's also illegal for them to drink, and we certainly can't keep them from drinking either. Anyway, I won't go into the politics of the situation. Alcohol works on the nervous system in two ways. Initially, it acts as a stimulant. It increases, increased use will produce a longer depressant stage. So it starts out as a stimulant, then it drifts into the depressant stage. Prolonged use of alcohol can damage your nerve cells, and we see this in individuals suffering who are alcoholics. Areas affected by long-term use include the Purkinje cells of the cerebellum, and if you've ever been around an alcoholic, they've lost their ability to move very well. A lot of times, they don't walk very well. They have lost their ability to use their hands very well. They can only do select things. I have my wife has a cousin who is an alcoholic. And he was really good at laying rugs. Of course, when you lay rugs, you have spikes on your knees or something, and you use your weight to push to tighten the rug up, and he was really good at it. Yes, they use a hammer, and they have another thing that they use. He can't use a hammer anymore. He can use the knee spikes or whatever they call them, but he can't use the hammer anymore because he'll hammer on that thing, and all of a sudden he'll let go of the hammer, and he'll go shooting across the room. So we can't do that anymore. And that was the only job he had. He's been an alcoholic for a long time. He may be dead. We're not really sure. He kind of disappeared after he couldn't work anymore. Anyway, so it affects the Purkinje cells of the cerebellum, the superior frontal cortex, and the hippocampal pyramidal cells. The hippocampal pyramidal cells have to do with memory. So all of a sudden, this guy who's been drinking for a long time can't remember stuff. And that's called Korsakoff syndrome. It has to do with disruption of these pyramidal cells, but it also has to do with vitamin B1. They have a depletion of vitamin B1 in their system, and that makes them kind of stupid. You can tell them anything, and they will take it as the gospel. They have no discerning ability whatsoever. So anything you tell them, they will assume it's correct. And that's known as Korsakoff syndrome. Drinker versus a non-drinker. This is a non-drinker over here on the left. As you can see, he's got a lot of his brain is active. This is the drinker over here. Not a whole lot going on over there. Alcohol activates the GABA receptor, increasing postsynaptic inhibition. Euphoria when drinking can be stimulated by dopamine activation, so there is a dopamine aspect to alcohol. It activates the dopamine loop, making people feel good. It activates excitatory glutamate receptors while it reduces the effects of glutamate and interferes with second messenger systems inside the neuron. So all of a sudden, your brain's not functioning as well as it did before. This is one of the reasons why when somebody's drunk, they have a hard time analyzing situations, like when they're trying to drive. Their eyesight's not nearly as acute as it was before, all because of this mechanism right here. So their eyes aren't really working very well. Their ears aren't working very well. If you've ever been around two drunks trying to talk to each other, fascinating, because neither one of them can understand what the other one says. And they start yelling at each other. And it takes the brain a little time. Normally, if you say something to me, I understand what you're saying. If I hear it, I can understand what you're saying. So we're okay. But if you're a drunk, it takes a couple seconds to interpret what the guy just said. So a conversation between two drunks is like listening to two people trying to think. And then they don't understand each other. It's just fascinating. And of course, they start yelling at each other. You know, one of them tells a joke and it's not funny, and the other one, and then they start laughing after about 3 or 4 seconds. It's kind of fascinating to watch, or not. Not all drunks are happy drunks. Some drunks are unhappy drunks. I've only been drunk 3 times in my life, and I'm an unhappy drunk, which is kind of a sad thing if you think about it. So why would somebody drink if it makes them depressed, right? And the answer is, well, it only took me 3 times to figure out, let's not do that anymore. That's stupid. And I always got sick afterwards. So I'm a really bad drunk. That's one of the reasons I don't drink. And I've suffered from it. People think you're supposed to drink. When I was over in Germany, we played a soccer game against the French. The French firemen. And afterwards, they wanted to have a big party. And of course, I was the best guy on the American team. And so they wanted to toast me. Well, if they toasted me, I was supposed to toast them back. But the problem was, I don't drink. And here as the evening went on, they had stronger and stronger and stronger drinks. That's the way the French do it. It started out with wine, then it went to cognac, and then brandy or something. I have no idea. But I had to bail out almost immediately because they were pissed. They were really upset that I wasn't toasting them. And they assumed that it was because there was something wrong, obviously something wrong with me. So I got into trouble. My first and second wives thought that I was a wimp because I didn't drink. You know, they didn't think that was right. Of course, my second wife was an alcoholic. But I didn't find that out until she left. She didn't drink while I was. She was using me to get clean because I didn't drink, and I had kids, and she couldn't drink, or she felt like she couldn't drink around the kids. But then, as soon as she went off the wagon, she left me because she found me so damn boring, I guess, because I didn't drink. Everybody knows that people that drink are far more exciting than anybody else. And in reality, what was taking place was all this stuff was taking place. So whereas before I was okay, as soon as she started drinking again, all of a sudden I was the most boring person in the world. And she swore that in a court of law, that I was the most boring person she'd ever been around. I wasn't boring when she was sober, but I was really boring when she was drunk. Because I wasn't, I don't know. However they think. Anyway, I'm the most boring person in the world. My first wife said it in a court of law in Texas. And my second wife swore it in a court of law in the state of Texas. So the state of Texas thinks I'm the most boring person in the world. And I'm not going to argue with them. Anxiolytics, anxiolytic means anxiety loosening, are medications that we use to treat anxiety. It hits the name anxiolytic, of course. 8% of American adults suffer from anxiety. One of the problems with anxiety is that sometimes it's drug-induced. Alcohol causes anxiety, or when you're not drunk. As long as you're drunk, you're okay. As soon as you're not drunk anymore, all of a sudden you're anxious. It's the same way with marijuana. People that smoke marijuana, as long as they're smoking pot, they're mellow, dude. Everything's fine. And then as soon as they're not as stoned as they were before, all of a sudden they become paranoid. They're easily bored. They become anxious. And this is one of the reasons why they go back. This is one of the reasons why alcoholics drink so much. This is one of the reasons why people smoke so much pot, because they don't feel normal when they're not stoned or they're not drunk. So there are a lot of people in the United States that they self-medicate. So they use alcohol or they use marijuana to self-medicate. The major anxiolytics now in use are benzodiazepines, with the most popular being alprazolam and diazepam, commonly known as Xanax and Valium are the two anxiolytics that are used the most. We don't use Valium as much as we used to. Once upon a time, Valium was the most popular drug in the world. And then we discovered Prozac, and then Prozac became the most popular drug in the world. And it was the most popular drug in the world for about 20 years. And then we discovered Viagra, and now Viagra is the most popular drug in the world, as odd as that seems. Since only males can take it, well, I guess females can take it. I don't know that it does anything to females. They don't have the same sexual response mechanism that males do, so it just wouldn't make any sense. I can understand that young men are taking Viagra despite the fact that they don't have problems with their erections, but and they take it for a prolonged reaction. But it doesn't make any sense for women to take Viagra at all. I don't know that it does anything.
Is Valium, is that what they give when somebody's having a seizure?
No, probably. Well, yeah, they give them a sedative to quiet things down. If they go into the emergency room, they'll give them Valium. They'll give them a IV, and they'll inject Valium into the IV. There are anti-seizure medications, Dilantin, carbamazepine, Dilantin, Tegretol. So they would probably give them one of those, one of the anti-seizure medications. Benzodiazepines work by enhancing GABA receptors, increasing the effect of the drug. So it increases GABA. GABA takes away anxiety. Benzodiazepines mirror the reduction of stress produced by allopregnanolone, a hormone derived from progesterone. Allopregnanolone binds to GABA receptors, increasing the effectiveness of GABA, and that's why it works. So it looks like a natural hormone, allopregnanolone. It is it's derived from progesterone. Now we all have all these drugs in our hormones in our system. If you're female, you have more. Now the problem is, the problem is when a woman goes through her cycle, one of the things that happens is she gets an increase of progesterone. She's fine as soon as that progesterone goes down, so that she can either ovulate or so that she will have her period. This level goes down. allopregnanolone. And since that goes down, then all of a sudden she feels more anxious. And if she has an extreme reaction, extreme hormonal reaction, then she will get PMS. She'll get bloated, and she will also become overly anxious. She starts having anxiety attacks of sorts, to a minor extent. Okay. So if you take a benzodiazepine, it acts as an allopregnanolone, and it increases the effectiveness of GABA, and now you're not anxious anymore. And all of these have to do with natural hormones that we have in our system. Males, one of the reasons that they don't feel anxiety the same as females do is because we don't have a fluctuation of these hormones. Does all that make sense? Okay. So we see a lot more women with anxiety problems than we do males. A lot, 2 to 1, I guess. The world is a lot more dangerous. Well, that's not really fair. The world's dangerous for everybody, I guess, equally. Males are less likely to get sexually assaulted, of course. GABA in turn inhibits the release of corticotropin releasing hormone, which triggers the stress response. So by reducing the probability that you'll have a stress response, it reduces your anxiety. Alcohol increases the level of allopregnanolone in the brain, creating a calming effect of alcohol, and this is one of the reasons why people who have anxiety use alcohol as a self-medication. The problem, of course, is they get the rebound effect, and anxiety has this effect. As long as you're taking Xanax, you're okay. As soon as you stop taking Xanax, all of a sudden you become overly anxious again. The anxiety is worse than it was before. You get what they refer to as the rebound effect. Now, if you're an alcoholic and you've got anxiety problems before you're drinking, and then you drink alcohol, all of a sudden you're not anxious anymore. Guess what happens when you're not drunk? Or guess what happens when you don't have any alcohol in your system? You get the rebound effect. Yeah, exactly. You get the jitters. Now all of a sudden your anxiety is worse than it was before. So you stay at least a little bit inebriated in order to keep from being overly anxious all the time. Stimulants are drugs that lead the brain to states of more excitation than inhibition. They have an alerting and activating effect. Some act by stimulating excitatory neurotransmitters. Some act by blocking normal inhibitory processes, as caffeine does with adenosine. Adenosine, of course, keeps you from becoming overly excited. That's what adenosine does. It's an inhibitory neurotransmitter. Well, caffeine blocks adenosine. Now, some people are sensitive to caffeine, and about 15% of the population are not. Maybe more than that. We haven't really done that much research. Caffeine really doesn't do very much. It doesn't hurt people, and since it doesn't hurt people, it rarely hurts people. And since it rarely hurts people, we don't do very much research looking at caffeine for a couple different reasons. One, the caffeine. The world of increased caffeine, like Starbucks and Monster and Rockstar, and what's the other one? 5 hour stuff.
5 hour energy.
Yeah. So the world of they make billions of dollars a year, especially coffee. There's a lot of money in coffee. So they try to convince people that they need to drink coffee in order to maintain their activity level. That's the idea. Well, people rarely die of too much caffeine. It has been known to happen, but it doesn't happen very often. You have more people that are not sensitive to caffeine than you have people that are overly sensitive to caffeine. And of course, if you're overly sensitive to caffeine, you become so agitated that you just don't use it anymore. You try to stay away from it. And because of that, of course, we don't do hardly any, there's hardly any research about caffeine. It would be fascinating, and you might try this. Look up caffeine for this chapter. You know, you have to do an article critique. Look up caffeine and see what you can find, what kind of research you can find dealing with caffeine. And what you're going to find is there's not a whole lot of research with caffeine out there. You're not going to find anybody that gives you any statistics as to what the percentage of people that aren't sensitive to caffeine. Now the reality is I'm not sensitive to caffeine, but I drink it anyway. I don't get anything out of it, but I just drink it because it's in my favorite drink, Mountain Dew. I love Mountain Dew.
Sounds like
The red stuff.
It's like pre-monsters. Before monsters came.
Oh yeah, they used to drink just gallons and gallons of the regular stuff.
There was I don't know if it's true, but I saw one where they did like a mixture of Mountain Dew with something, and the whole thing glowed.
Oh really?
Yeah, it's interesting, but I'm not sure if it's even real. Could be a hoax, but
It's a good hoax.
They use a Mountain Dew. They mix it with something, I don't know, but it really illuminates the whole bottle. I guess it's like something for FYI. If you're stuck somewhere, you can use Mountain Dew.
Mountain Dew to signal people. How strange is that? And fun. Sounds like a good time. Okay. And you're putting that stuff into your system. I think I've told you the story before. My mom was hypersensitive to coffee. And as she got older, she became more and more sensitive to it. When she reached her late 80s, early 90s, if she drank even a half a cup of coffee, she would have heart palpitations. So it looked like she was having a heart attack. So a couple times she made the mistake of drinking coffee. My mother grew up during the Depression, so she never wasted anything. So if there was a half a cup of coffee sitting on the table and somebody wasn't drinking, she would drink it because not to waste it instead of dumping it down the sink. She'd also eat almost rotten food because, well, that's the way she was raised. You know, they couldn't waste anything. So she's kind of a nut as far as that was concerned. But one time when my dad was getting sicker and sicker, and he drank coffee by the bucket load, and he wasn't sensitive to it. But he left a half a cup of coffee, she drank it, and they had to take her to the hospital. They had to call the ambulance out because she was having heart palpitations. I have a brother that is hypersensitive to caffeine the same way. He was driving from Muncie, Indiana to Norfolk, Virginia. His daughter was married to a guy that was in the Navy, and they were stationed in Norfolk, Virginia. So every weekend they would drive back and forth just to see the little girl. She's nuts anyway, but that's not neither here nor there. So my brother was driving by himself from Muncie, Indiana to Norfolk, Virginia. It's about a, 14-hour trip or something. Anyway, he drank a Mountain Dew. He drank a 16-ounce bottle of Mountain Dew. 2 days later, they found him in Maine. He had hallucinations from the caffeine, and he ended up in the middle of Maine. In a back road, they just found him, and he was out of his mind. And so he called me up on the telephone, don't drink Mountain Dew. This stuff's hallucinogenic. And yeah, right. You know, I've been drinking Mountain Dew all my life with no effect whatsoever. I mean, it doesn't even keep me awake at night. So anyway, we won't.
I know my brother, when we were driving back to Oklahoma one time, he had a Red Bull with one of those 5-hour, these little bottles of
Energy drink, yeah.
He mixed it. He drank it at the same time. So when we were driving down the road, he said it was just, I don't know, it blacked out. He couldn't see anything. So we went off the median. He went to the side, and I was sleeping when I woke up, and I just thought I heard the grill on the side, he hit it. So I woke up and I thought, oh my gosh, and he stopped really quick in the median, and he jumped out, and he was just like jumping around.
Shaking his hand,
Mm-hmm.
yeah.
And he says, I can't see. He goes, I can't. He says it was just like a blackout for a moment. He said he couldn't see anything. So he jumped up and he was just, oh, he was jumping. He says, this is weird, you know. So
You know what actually happened to him?
I don't know.
He went to sleep. He went to sleep, and that's why he couldn't see anything, because he was asleep, and his brain was still active, despite the fact that he was, his brain had gone to sleep. So it was awake and asleep at the same time.
Oh my gosh.
I hope you didn't let him drive anymore
No,
until
no.
all that stuff burned off.
Yeah.
It takes about 5 hours for it to burn off, so.
Yeah, and you talked all the way. It's just like, you see-
It's almost like he was on speed. Yeah, 5 hour has a lot of, 5 hour energy drink has a lot of caffeine in it. It tastes bad. I don't know why people even use it. I tried it. We got a free sample and something. And I tried it and I thought, well, this is a horrible taste. Yeah, just real bitter. But then again, caffeine is bitter. Caffeine is really bitter, and that's why they have to put so much sugar in Mountain Dew and Coke, because they put caffeine in it, and caffeine is bitter, so they have to put a lot of sugar to combat the flavor. As sad as all that is, what are we talking about? Okay, so the adenosine. Nicotine, until the advent of milder cigarettes, nicotine was not widely used. People smoked cigars, people smoked pipes, but the nicotine was, the tobacco was so harsh, they could draw it into their mouths, but they couldn't take it down into their lungs because of the harsh tobacco. But then they invented cigarettes, and the tobacco, for one thing, there's a lot less tobacco in cigarettes than there might be in a pipe tobacco or in a cigar. And for that reason, of course, the nicotine or the tobacco became less harsh, and people were able to actually draw it down into their lungs. And if you watch old movies, especially the movies from the 40s and 50s, you see a lot of individuals drawing, they will be smoking a cigarette, and it just kind of lays there on their lips, and then all of a sudden they'll take a deep breath, they'll draw it down into their lungs, then they'll blow it out through their nose. And you can do that with a cigarette, but you certainly couldn't do that with a pipe or with a cigar. So they invented cigarettes, and because of that, one of the other things that they did with cigarettes was that they increased the nicotine level. And they claimed that the reason they were increasing the nicotine level was because it made the cigarettes less harsh. But the reality was they knew exactly what they were doing. The more nicotine in the cigarette, the more addictive the cigarette. Nicotine is the most addictive substance known to man. So they were hooking these people on cigarettes, on the nicotine. And if you've ever been around somebody that is a chain smoker or somebody that smokes a lot, they can't be without a cigarette for a very long period of time, because they start getting withdrawals. And of course, it's really fun to be around these guys because they're so agitated. I had a colleague when I was working at North, and every time I started to speak in a meeting, she'd get up and she'd go out for a cigarette break. For two reasons. One, she was having nicotine withdrawals, but the other thing was she hated me and she didn't want to have anything to do with me. So if I started speaking in a meeting, that was her trigger to go outside and have a cigarette, take a nicotine break. She was a mess, though. When we taught in an hour and 20 minutes segments, just like we do now. She'd have to take a cigarette break in the middle of her class. She'd have to go out and smoke a cigarette just so that she could finish, because she'd start getting grumpier and grumpier and louder and meaner until she went out and took a cigarette break. So if she were working on something and she couldn't stop, the kids would go, it's about time to take a break, isn't it? It's about time to take a break. She couldn't go for 45 minutes without a cigarette. It was nuts. Eventually, she died in an automobile accident. I don't think that had anything to do with the fact that she hated me. I didn't curse her or anything. Not that I can remember anyway. She's dead, though. Let's just put it that way. She's dead. Because of the mildness of cigarette smoke, it is more readily drawn into the lungs, and thus it's able to cover a large surface of the lungs, and for that reason, of course, it's highly addictive. The harsher forms of tobacco tend to only come in contact with the mucous membrane. And of course, Freud was a famous cigar smoker. He smoked cigars. And of course, you can't draw cigar smoke down into your lungs, it's too harsh. So he smoked a lot of cigars. So what happened to him, he got cancer of the jaw. And they had to take his whole lower jaw out. And they made him a metal prosthesis that he put to eat with and to talk with, because you need a lower jaw. So he had to put this thing in every day. He called it the monster. He hated it. He despised it. He wished he were dead, as strange as that seems. He lived into his 80s, and for the last 8 years of his life, he had this prosthesis in his jaw. So if you see a picture of him later on in life, just before he died, you can tell that his jaw is not quite right. There's something wrong with it, and it's because he was. Of course, you're getting the same carcinogens you would be getting in your lungs if he smokes cigarettes. He would have drawn that down into his lungs. He would have gotten lung cancer, and he would have died. But because he smoked cigars, he just had cancer of the jaw, which was kind of funny. I had a friend that he was my neighbor, young guy, and he used to smoke. He used to chew tobacco because he thought it was cool. Anyway, he he not only got cancer he got cancer of the salivary glands in his mouth because he swallowed the tobacco juice. That's so stupid. You need to spit that stuff out. Anyway, he got cancer of the salivary glands, so they had to take out all of the salivary glands, but they also had to take out his lymph nodes in his neck, and they had to fuse his vertebrae. So he walks around like this because they fused his vertebrae. Since they had to take out a lot of the muscles too. He's got one side of his face, there's no muscles on the back side of his face. So he walks around like this monster. He's a judge, as strange as that may seem. He's a judge. I think he's still alive. I'm hoping he's still alive. He's really an interesting guy and a smart guy. Now that he's lost all of his face, so much of his face, now he's a lot nicer than he was before. I guess he's living on borrowed time. Nicotine activates the acetylcholine receptors known as nicotinic receptors. These receptors are found primarily in the neuromuscular junctions in the neurons of the autonomic ganglia. And for this reason, people who are athletes, especially baseball players, will chew tobacco or they'll smoke in between innings to get an extra shot of this nicotine. And that will actually make them function better out on the field. And this is one of the reasons why back in the old days, and I say the old days, it was the 50s and 60s, everybody chewed tobacco. All baseball players chewed tobacco. But then they started having problems with cancer. These individuals were starting to develop cancer at a much younger age than they were before. Nobody cared if the retired guy died of cancer of the mouth. But all of a sudden we started seeing this in active baseball players. And because of that, of course, they started cracking down on that. And if you watch a baseball game today, I don't know if any of you are baseball fans, but if you watch a baseball game today, you still see people with stuff in their...
No, it's spring training. I'm wearing my baseball team.
Okay. I got the wrong message, okay.
Of course you would.
Of course I would.
Of course you would.
Spring training, okay. For who? What spring training for the...
Diamondbacks.
Diamondbacks, okay. Who are not going to win the National League West, it looks like. Sorry. They've been in first place for an extended length of time. And I'm sorry. It's not my fault. I don't think. Anyway, what was they talking about? Okay, so these baseball players, now if you look at them, they still have something in their jaw, but it's not tobacco, it's sunflower seeds. And so you'll see them in between plays spitting out sunflower seeds and whatnot. Or you'll see them in the dugout spitting sunflower seeds all over the place. Some people still will, and the other thing that they're doing is they're taking chewing tobacco and they're wrapping it with bubble gum to reduce the amount of tobacco in the. And the other idea is that all the negative things in the tobacco sticks to the bubble gum, so it doesn't get out. You don't have to spit if you do that, if you're wrapping it. Nicotine works on the body by increasing the heart rate, by stimulating the sympathetic nervous system and stimulating the release of epinephrine. And since it's releasing epinephrine, of course, that makes you stronger than you would be otherwise. So here we are, we've got these baseball players. Of course, they only chew tobacco while they are playing baseball. So they get this surge of epinephrine while they're playing the game, and they're able to play at a very high, they tend to be able to play at a very high level. Of course, now baseball is trying to crack down on chewing tobacco. They say it's bad for the kids. It's a bad symbol. Cocaine is synthesized with coca shrub, from the coca shrub. In their natural or more diluted form, the coca leaves do not produce either an extreme reaction or the possibility of addiction. Increased endurance, lower sensitivity to hunger, and a vague sense of well-being. And this is all that happens with the coca leaves. When I was in Peru, of course, there's coca leaves all over the place. They drink coca tea. But in order to activate this stuff, you need baking soda or you need lime in order to release all of the properties of the coca leaf. I know, they chew shells, they chew seashells, the calcium from the seashells, and that would release the cocaine. Yeah. Anyway, so they, when we landed in Cusco, Cusco used to be the capital of the Inca Empire. When we landed in Cusco, there were all kinds of people trying to sell us coca leaves. I didn't feel like I needed it. They were telling us, well, we came from Lima, which is right on the coast, at zero elevation, and we flew up to Cusco, which is at 9,000 feet.
You're going to need it.
Yeah, well, that's what they said, we would need it, but there were a couple of us that were the two healthiest people in the group. We didn't use any coca at all, and we had no problems whatsoever. But then again, we were both really active. We're running up and down the mountains and stuff. We climbed the mountain at Machu Picchu. We climbed up Huayna Picchu. I know, and that's just straight up. I mean, it's almost like climbing a ladder. It's horrible. But we were the two more active individuals. The rest of everybody's going, oh, we need to use cocaine. So they're drinking coca tea and they were chewing the leaves and whatnot. And none of them got a buzz out of it. They psyched them out.
Placebo.
There's a placebo effect, exactly. And we didn't use anything at all, and we were running circles around those other guys.
Like you guys were.
We were running circles anyway. Yeah, it was nuts. Yeah, but the Inca Empire was built on coca leaves, in essence. And of course, the coca leaves came from the other side of the mountain. Peru is right here, the Andes are right here, and then on the other side is the Amazon River Valley. And it was the natives of the Amazon River Valley that's where the coca shrubs were. And so they would pick it and they would sell it they'd transport it over the mountains and they would sell it to the Inca. And then, of course, they would give it to their peasants, and the peasants would build their roads and build their fabulous buildings and whatnot. So it's kind of interesting. Synthesized into concentrated powder or crystal, the crack cocaine, the effect is much stronger, of course, than it is from the leaves. As a powder, it is snorted through the nostrils for rapid lung diffusion and thus rapid entry into the bloodstream. Crack, when smoked, enters the bloodstream even faster. Sadly, I have a lot of experience dealing with all of these, with cocaine and crack and the rocks, because when I was working in the hospital in Omaha, this became very popular, cocaine and crack and the rock. Well, the crack is the rocks. I don't know what I'm talking about here. Cocaine blocks norepinephrine receptors and allows more of the transmitter to circulate in the brain, so you feel like you can conquer the world. That's what norepinephrine does, makes you feel like you can do things. Because cocaine is a vasoconstrictor, it increases the blood pressure and induces greater heart activity. If you use cocaine, the first time you use it, it may kill you. Because if you have a heart defect, that defect will come out and it can potentially kill you. People will stroke out snorting cocaine. People who have used cocaine for an extended length of time will stroke out using cocaine because it's a vasoconstrictor, but it's an extreme vasoconstrictor. People that snort a lot of cocaine, of course this doesn't happen very often anymore because stuff is too expensive. We're not using it like they did back in the 80s and the 90s, but people that snorted a lot of cocaine would destroy the septum, the bony portion of your nose. This is all cartilage, so it has to be fed by blood. It's just like anything else in your body. You've got to feed it in order for it to maintain itself. When you snort cocaine, it's a vasoconstrictor, so it shuts off the blood supply to the cartilage in your nose. And what happened was these individuals were getting deviated septums. They were getting holes between the two nostrils. The bone was dying, the cartilage was dying in their nose, and they'd have to have their noses reconstructed. Linda Ronstadt was a big-time coke snorter, and she had to have her nose reconstructed 3 times.
Oh boy.
Yeah, you can look at some old pictures of Linda Ronstadt. When she was young, she was, her nose was one way, and then all of a sudden it just kind of pugged up on her because the cartilage was dying and it was degenerating. And so her nose would plug up, and then all of a sudden she'd have a regular nose again, and then all of a sudden it would plug up again, and then,
Jeez.
So she's a famous cocaine snorter. Another famous cocaine snorter was the singer, John Denver. John Denver was a big-time cocaine snorter. And they think that maybe he died when he was 50, he was in an airplane crash, but they think maybe he had snorted cocaine before they knew, before he flew out into the ocean. Anyway, so there you go. It's a vasoconstrictor. It's not real smart to use this stuff. Oh, so what's going to happen if you've got a very attractive woman and she becomes pregnant and she's got a baby, or she's growing a baby in her womb? What happens next? Well, we'll talk about that in a second. Oddly, cocaine leads to less activity in the frontal lobe, the seat of intellectual functioning. You feel, because of the increased norepinephrine level, you feel like you're smart. You know everything. But the reality is, that portion of your brain that does all the thinking is actually working much, much slower than it was before. So you think you're smart, but the ideas you're having aren't very smart. Even after stopping the use of cocaine, the brain does not return to normal metabolism for several months.
Jeez.
18 months. You have meth head for 18 months. So you're stupid for 18 months. Remember, cocaine slows down this functioning, and you've got to recover this functioning. It takes about 18 months for you to get back to where you are before. I had a student who was a meth user. And when she was using the meth, she thought all of her ideas were brilliant. They were not especially that brilliant. They arrested her and threw her in jail for about 12 months. And when she came back, of course she'd gone off meth while she was in the can. And when she came back, she was not as bright as she was before. Luckily, she had an IQ in the 140 range. So when she lost 20 or 25 points, she was still fairly smart. Yeah, she was still relatively functional. But she wasn't as smart as she was.
That sucks.
Well, the sad part was that right at the 18-month mark, something happened and she went back on crystal meth. So she was almost back to where she was before. It just broke my heart. Children exposed to cocaine in the womb may suffer from irreversible harm to the development of the brain. Remember, it slows down the brain. I've seen this way, way more than I even want to think about. Like I said, when I was working in Omaha, I was there from 1982 until 1990. we were in Omaha, and I worked at Children's Hospital, and then I also worked at St. Joseph Hospital. On the weekends, I worked at Bergen Mercy Hospital on the other side of town. Anyway, I was working at all these different hospitals. We had, and of course, I was working in the NICU and in the delivery room as well. We saw this way too much. The babies would come out, and there would be something wrong with them. Cocaine just really screws up what's going on as far as pregnancy is concerned. As you can imagine, it's a vasoconstrictor. The more you snort, the less blood your baby's getting. The more you snort, it gets into the blood, of course, and it affects the baby's brain development. You got all kinds of problems. A lot of these babies were born stillborn. Just really, really sad. And it was mostly the richest people in town. That was, I guess it's not that sad. I mean, they were just screwing up their kids, and well, they were killing their kids in essence. Most of them didn't survive. You know, you have to have a brain in order to survive, and these babies were being born with half a brain. They were being born. There were all kinds of horrible deformities, like their heart was on the outside of their bodies. We had one baby that was born without a skull. It's just ugly, ugly stuff that you can imagine. Hopefully you can imagine what the stuff that I saw, but it was really ugly, and it was very, very painful. And the sad part was it was the smartest people in town that were doing this. I know, it was stupid. Cocaine seems to interfere with the ability to focus attention and with some intellectual functioning. And of course, despite the fact you think that you are the smartest person in the world, the reality is you can't stay focused on one thing. It makes you ADHD, which is always fun. So we're talking about stimulants. Amphetamines are synthetic stimulants. Cocaine, of course, is a natural stimulant. Amphetamines and methamphetamines have a similar structure to that of catecholamine transmitters, epinephrine, norepinephrine, and dopamine. So while you've got this stuff in your system, you have increases of all three of these neurotransmitters. This one makes you happy, makes you excited. This one gives you energy, and this one makes you think that you can conquer the world. So as you're using your amphetamines and methamphetamines, you're getting this superficial burst of positive thought. The amphetamines cause the release of these transmitters from the synaptic vesicles without a nerve impulse, of course, and because of that, you've got too much of all those three neurotransmitters in your system. After the release of the transmitters, the amphetamines enhance the activity by blocking the reuptake of endogenous transmitters. So all it releases all of the epinephrine and the norepinephrine and the dopamine, and now you have more in your system than you're supposed to have. Competing with the endogenous transmitters for the enzyme that inactivates them, of course, and that the amphetamines will block all of that. So now we have made you very excited. You've got too much epinephrine, you've got too much norepinephrine, you have too much dopamine in your system. And so how do you start acting on amphetamines or methamphetamines? You start acting like you're schizophrenic. You're agitated. Your brain is whirring, like it's spinning, like you're pushing on the gas pedal and you're pushing on the clutch at the same time. So you're getting your engine is just spinning and not doing anything, and that's what your brain is doing on amphetamines. Isn't that exciting? Thus, the amphetamines prolong the presence of endogenous transmitters in the synaptic cleft. You're only supposed to have these in your synaptic cleft for a select amount of time. This makes you sane, this makes you functional, and now suddenly on the amphetamines you're not sane and you're not functional. Amphetamines, a short-term effect, it heightens alertness to the state of euphoria. It wards off boredom. Boredom is so much fun. People who smoke pot they find everything exciting, but when they're not stoned, nothing is exciting. Now you have to remember that your brain is trying to protect itself. It's always trying to protect itself. So if you excite it with something, with too much amphetamines, if you excite it with all of these things, you get a downregulation of receptor sites. So the brain is trying to protect itself.
Say less of that.
Exactly. Otherwise, you're going to get excitotoxicity. So your brain is trying to protect itself. So while you're on amphetamines, you're still getting a reaction, but your brain is trying to protect itself by reducing the number of receptor sites. So what happens when you're not on amphetamines? Well, you have fewer receptor sites.
So your reaction isn't as
It is,
fast or as much as.
and it's the opposite of what it should be. So if you're not bored while you're smoking pot, because you have a downregulation of those receptor sites, the anandamide receptor sites, all of a sudden, when you're not smoking pot anymore and you're not stoned anymore, you're bored to tears, and you can't find anything that makes you feel good. It's the same way with amphetamines. As long as you're on amphetamines, you don't feel boredom. You feel excited. When you're not on amphetamines, because of the downregulation of the receptor sites, you feel boredom, and you can't control it. So what do? Of course, you have to take more amphetamines just to feel normal.
Isn't that kind of like just? Isn't that kind of like just being like distracted for an extended amount of time
Yeah.
from
Yeah.
what you're supposed to be paying attention to, like reality, real time feelings,
Right,
real
so
time reactions?
your reality is completely different from everyone else's reality, because your life, your world is accelerated. So you're taking in stimulation that other people aren't paying attention to. So you have a new reality while you're on amphetamines. I know. How fun is this? It gets better. Your quality of work, of course, is not enhanced, even though you feel like you're on top of the world, you can do anything. It increases motivation, but not cognitive ability. You don't get smarter. You can't take this drug and make yourself smarter. There are drugs that you can take and make yourself you can raise your IQ by 10 or 15 points. Those do exist now. We do have those drugs. But of course, we're not going to give them to everybody. We can't. Amphetamines affect the autonomic nervous system by producing high blood pressure. It also produces tremors and dizziness. You sweat profusely, and there's an interesting odor that people put off when they are on amphetamines, and it stinks. It smells like they have anxiety. That's what it smells like. Well, you guys, thank God you have no idea what people smell like when they're on this stuff. But I used to get them in the emergency room all the time, and we could tell by the smell what those guys have been taking. And of course, it does come out their pores to some extent. But it's the sweat. The sweat is completely different. Rapid breathing, and they may feel nausea. The long-term effects, tolerance, progressive loss of effectiveness of the drug, of course, so they have to take more and more and more of this stuff. This may be due to excitotoxicity, what we were talking about before, sleeplessness, severe weight loss, general deterioration of mental and physical condition. Extreme use may lead to symptoms similar to those of paranoid schizophrenia, compulsive agitated behavior, irrational suspiciousness. Observation of those who use chronically shows symptoms of brain damage. So let's all use amphetamines. This makes just a ton of sense. Makes you feel really good while you're using it, but it destroys your brain. It destroys your reality. It just destroys everything. And it's the dumbest stuff that you can possibly use.
So what is the use for amphetamines?
I mean, why would we give it to somebody? We give it to people who, we give it to anorexics, trying to make them want to eat. Of course, this reduces their desire to eat, but we give it to them just to increase their activity level.
So their body can get hungry enough to want to eat
Exactly.
something.
Exactly.
Oh,
This is a really serious
That's a
problem.
harsh drug.
I'm sorry?
It's like a harsh drug.
It is. We use it for weight loss as well. And it works. It really works when somebody's on. We used to, back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we used these as diet pills.
That could explain a lot of the dysfunction in the male and females
We didn't really give it to
Reproductive
males.
cycles.
We gave it to females.
But
Males,
they give birth to males too.
that's true. That's true. Well, we got a lot of problems, and we can talk about those problems next time. We got tons of problems.